There's a puppet hanging in your closet. You've never seen it. You didn't put it there. But somehow, it wears your face. Every time you speak, it moves. Every time you make a decision, it mimics your hand. And when you stare at the mirror long enough, you start to wonder, which one of you is pulling the strings? They don't teach you this in school. They don't have to. Society doesn't need to lock you in a room to control you. It just needs to convince you that the room is your home. Carl Jung warned us. People would do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But what if you've never even met your soul? What if the identity you parade through life is a carefully stitched costume assembled by advertising, tradition, trauma, and repetition? Not a self, but a role. Not a life, but a script. Ask yourself, who told you what success looks like? Who decided which emotions are ugly? Who convinced you that productivity equals worth? And why are you still playing along? You're not craving freedom. You're craving permission. To speak without filtering. To rest without guilt. To live without apologizing. But you've been programmed to believe that kind of life is reckless, unearned, or selfish. So instead, you chase approval. You call it ambition. You mistake exhaustion for purpose. It's elegant, really, the psychological trap, because it doesn't feel like a prison. It feels like your choice. That's how deep the programming runs. You wear clothes that make you belong. You scroll until your opinions are no longer your own. You measure your value in likes, in income, in steps counted by a device on your wrist. And it all feels normal. But normal is not neutral. Normal is a machine with a smile painted on its gears. Jung believed that every culture builds a mask and calls it identity. The problem is, we forget it's a mask. We stare at the reflection and forget there's a face underneath, a wild, untamed, ancient face. One that remembers the world before language, before judgment, before society handed you a name and a checklist. The question isn't, who am I? The question is, who benefits from me never asking? Because once you start asking, things unravel. Why do I crave success? Why do I fear being disliked? Why do I feel ashamed of resting? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, what would be left of me if I stopped performing? Jung believed the path to wholeness wasn't becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. That's the shadow we're chasing now, not to run from it, but to integrate it. Because society didn't just raise you, it scripted you. And until you see the strings, you'll never know whose dance you're dancing. The most dangerous form of control is the one that feels like safety. You weren't given chains. You were handed a map, a path, a set of rules scribbled in the margins of culture, whispered by teachers, enforced by praise and punishment. And before you even knew you had a choice, you were already walking it. It began before memory, before language, before you were even conscious of being a you. Carl Jung understood this with chilling precision. He called it the collective unconscious, the inherited reservoir of instincts, archetypes, and social patterns that shape how humans behave across time. It's not personal. It's mythic. It's the blueprint beneath civilization. And yet, it slips into your psyche like a parasite disguised as intuition. From birth, you are steeped in archetypes. The hero, the good girl, the provider, the outsider, the rebel. You don't choose them. You absorb them. You try them on like costumes, performing until one fits, or until the world approves of the mask you picked. And that's where the fracture begins. Jung called it a persona, the social mask you wear to navigate society. It is not inherently evil. In fact, you need it to survive. But when the persona becomes fused with the self, when you forget you are acting, something vital dies. Authenticity. You laugh because others laugh. You desire what others reward. You suppress what others shame. Eventually, you become fluent in the culture's expectations, but illiterate in your own soul. And here's the horror. You are applauded for this, promoted for it, loved for it, but not seen. You become like the actor who forgets the play ever ends, applauded from the stage, but alone in the dressing room. This is not a new sickness. Nietzsche saw it in his time and called it slave morality, a system where individuals are conditioned to suppress their true instincts, bow to the herd, and punish anything that threatens a group's fragile sense of moral superiority. Authenticity becomes sin. Power becomes selfishness. Depth becomes madness. So you comply, and your compliance is called virtue. You build a life based on what should be desired: money, stability, a partner, a home. And you chase them not because they fulfill you, but because not chasing them feels like failure. Do you see the design? You were not built to conform. You were trained to. And the worst part? The more you fit in, the more invisible you become, to others and to yourself. Arthur Schopenhauer, the bitter yet brilliant pessimist, argued that the will, the blind, endless force driving all existence, is inherently unsatisfiable. Humans desire not because they are free, but because they are enslaved to this will, doomed to chase illusions that vanish the moment they're grasped. And society? It weaponizes this truth. It attaches status to things that never satisfy, just enough to keep you chasing, never enough to let you rest. You don't pursue joy. You pursue distraction. Not peace, but numbness. And all the while, the soul cries out beneath the surface, unheard but not silent. Jung called that buried voice the shadow. The parts of you exiled to the dark because they were once judged, punished, or rejected. Your anger, your sensuality, your ambition, your madness, your creativity, your divine chaos. Society doesn't want your wholeness. It wants your obedience. But the shadow does not forget. It whispers in sleepless nights, in quiet moments of rage, in the dead eyes behind smiling selfies. It waits, and the longer you ignore it, the louder it becomes. You were meant to individuate, not to assimilate, to become a full self, not a socially acceptable one. But to do that, you must confront a terrifying truth. Most of your thoughts were never yours to begin with. They were programmed. By repetition, by reward, by rejection. They came through media, through religion, through well-meaning parents and broken systems. They arrived so early, so softly, that they became indistinguishable from your own voice. And now they guide you from the inside. You believe you are choosing, but you are reacting to traumas you forgot, to lessons you never questioned, to values you never chose. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Because unless you recognize the forces that shaped you, you'll remain trapped, performing a life that looks perfect but feels hollow. Carl Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But what if fate is just another word for programming? And what if freedom begins, not by changing your life, but by questioning why you live it the way you do? This is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires staring into your own falseness. It means grieving a life you built while asleep, but it also means waking up. And that is where the rebellion begins. You don't notice the weight of chains when you're born wearing them. They become part of your posture, how you walk, how you breathe, how you carry yourself in the world. You adjust to the tightness. You normalize the ache. Eventually, you forget you were ever meant to feel light. This is the silent cost of social programming. Not pain, but numbness. Not suffering, but spiritual amnesia. You don't scream. You don't rebel. You comply, and the world rewards you for it. But beneath the surface of your achievements, your lifestyle, your identity, something festers. A silent erosion, a slow decay. Your soul is shrinking. This isn't poetic exaggeration. It's the precise psychological effect of long-term disconnection from the self. Carl Jung observed this in countless patients. Men and women who had outwardly succeeded, but inwardly fractured. People who did everything they were told would lead to fulfillment, and found only a persistent hollowness that no amount of consumption could fill. They were, as Jung described it, divided within themselves, the persona performing one life, the shadow grieving another. And this split doesn't just affect the individual. It metastasizes across culture. A society of fragmented selves creates a civilization of projection, blame, and compulsive distraction. Let's break it down. 1. The echo chamber of self-reinforcement. Once society programs your mind, you begin unconsciously reinforcing that programming in others. You expect your partner to validate your mask, not your truth. You reward your children for obedience, not authenticity. You avoid people who reflect your suppressed parts, labeling them toxic, unstable, or too much. In this way, Social conditioning becomes self-replicating. The very people who once suffered under it now enforce it, because it feels familiar and therefore safe. You stop questioning the system. You become the system. 2. Cognitive bias becomes identity. Psychologists call it confirmation bias, the brain's tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. When you've been programmed to believe certain things, e.g., that success equals happiness, that vulnerability is weakness, that failure is shameful, your brain begins filtering the world to validate those beliefs, regardless of their truth. You'll ignore your exhaustion to chase status. You'll interpret someone's boundaries as rejection. You'll mislabel anxiety as laziness. The programming corrupts perception itself. And perception, as Jung knew, is the architecture of reality. 3. The inner critic as a social cop. Have you noticed it? The voice in your head that mocks your dreams, that ridicules your desires, that whispers, "Who do you think you are?" That voice isn't you. It's a remnant, a ghost, a fragmented piece of every teacher, parent, peer, and system that told you not to be too loud, too weird, too much. You internalize the enforcers. Jung called this the superego, shaped largely by external values and morality. But in a deeply conformist culture, the superego becomes a tyrant, beating the soul into submission in the name of being realistic, humble, or normal. And we wonder why so many people can't feel joy, even when they've done everything right. 4. Addiction to distraction. If you're disconnected from your authentic self, you will unconsciously seek substitutes. Consumerism thrives on this void. Every unexamined desire becomes a product. Every insecurity becomes an opportunity for profit. Scroll, click, consume. The faster the pace, the quieter the questions. The quieter the questions, the longer the sleep. This isn't accidental. It's systemic. A distracted population is a docile one. A numbed psyche is a profitable one. And so, we binge on noise to avoid silence, because silence is where the real questions live. 5. The death of meaning. When you live someone else's script, you can't write your own. This is the ultimate consequence of societal programming. Meaninglessness. You follow the map. You reach the destination. And then, nothing. No sense of arrival. No deep peace. No inner yes. Just a subtle horror that none of it was yours. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, warned that a loss of meaning leads to what he called the existential vacuum. In this state, individuals become vulnerable to nihilism, addiction, and authoritarian control, grasping for anything that can simulate purpose. He wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. And yet, even pleasure begins to feel counterfeit, because it is. So now we come to a turning point. What if everything you thought would make you happy was planted there by a system that never cared if you were? What if your anxiety isn't a flaw, but a signal, a warning light, a psychic alarm screaming through the numbness? This is not your life." Carl Jung believed that the path to healing, to wholeness, was not found in blind rebellion, nor in passive acceptance. It was found in conscious confrontation, the willingness to look beneath the persona, to sit with the shadow, to re-enter the silence, not as a victim, but as a seeker. And this, perhaps, is the most dangerous thing you can do in a programmed world. Wake up, because once you see the machine, you can never unsee it. And once you hear the soul's cry beneath the static, you can no longer pretend the noise is enough. It doesn't begin with revolution. It begins with noticing. Noticing that your laughter sometimes feels hollow. Noticing that your goals don't make your heartbeat quicken anymore. Noticing that the version of you walking through life might just be a role you were cast into. That moment, the moment of inner pause, is the beginning of rebellion. Not a rebellion of fire and fists, but of awareness, of stillness, so sharp it cuts through illusion. Carl Jung believed that true freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the discovery of one's authentic self beneath the masks. And to discover that self, you must do the unthinkable in a world addicted to speed. You must stop performing. Step 1, make the unconscious conscious. To reclaim your mind, you must first see the programming. Begin by tracing every major belief you hold. Why do you work the way you do? Why do you think rest is lazy? Why do you fear being alone? Why do you believe success will redeem you? Then ask, where did this belief come from? Most won't have an answer, and that is the answer, because what is unconscious controls you, and what is unexamined becomes sacred, not because it is true, but because it is invisible. The moment you begin questioning your inner narrative, you start to create space between you and the voice in your head. That space is where your self begins. Step 2, embrace the shadow. You've been taught to fear your flaws, to suppress your rage, to hide your pain, to silence your hunger. But Jung taught that these are not enemies. They are exiled parts of your wholeness. The shadow is not evil. It is a container for everything you rejected to survive in a programmed world. Want freedom? Invite it in. Sit with your envy. Honor your grief. Let your anger speak. Not act, but speak. Because every part of you that was once shamed carries a gift. Every suppressed emotion holds wisdom. And every time you choose to witness what you were taught to hide, you reclaim another piece of yourself. You do not become whole by being pure. You become whole by being honest. Step 3, deconstruct the script. We live in stories, but some of them are cages dressed up as castles. The story of making it, the story of being enough, the story of doing what expected. Tear them down, one line at a time. Ask yourself, if no one was watching, no parents, no friends, no audience, what would I still choose? That question alone is dangerous because it strips you bare. It reveals how much of your life was a performance for people who were also pretending. The moment you let go of those borrowed scripts, you begin writing your own. Step 4, create sacred silence. The world is loud on purpose. Noise keeps the programming intact. Notifications, opinions, trends, chaos. It keeps your attention scattered, your soul diluted. Want to rebel? Create silence. Not empty silence, but sacred silence. Meditate. Walk without your phone. Journal without editing. Return again and again to a place where your thoughts are not being directed by an algorithm, because you can't hear the self while you're still tuned into the system. And when the noise fades, something begins to rise. A strange, quiet knowing. Not loud, not flashy, but ancient. And yours. Step 5, redefine power. In a programmed world, power is defined by dominance, wealth, control, visibility. But these are fragile substitutes for something deeper. Self-possession. To walk into a room without needing to be liked. To choose joy even when others choose fear. To act from truth, not reaction. To belong to yourself, not to the tribe, not to the brand, not to the role. That is power. And once you taste it, you no longer crave their approval. You become ungovernable, not because you resist every rule, but because your life is no longer being lived for applause. Step 6, find the others. Individuation is not isolation. It's connection without conformity. You're not the only one waking up. There are others, quietly, defiantly, questioning everything, not to burn it all down, but to rebuild from something real. Find them, not the loudest ones, not the trendiest ones, but the ones who make you feel seen in your silence, the ones who remind you of who you were before you were programmed. Because healing may begin alone, but awakening is contagious. You were not born to be a product. You were not meant to survive in performance mode. You are not here to carry forward a system that profits from your forgetfulness. You are here to remember. And every time you speak your truth, reclaim your desire, sit with your shadow, or unplug from a noise, you do something sacred. You break the spell. You've been told that the self is something you build, piece by piece, achievement by achievement, a brand, a body, a list of accolades, a gallery of curated moments. But what if you've had it backwards all along? What if the self is not something you construct, but something you uncover, beneath the scripts, beneath the shame, beneath the noise and name and role and mask? There is something untouched, not perfect, not polished, but real. Carl Jung called this the self, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, ancient and evolving. The self is not a product of the world. It is what the world tries to bury. And here lies a final, most terrifying truth. You were never lost. You were only covered. All your life, you've searched through relationships, accomplishments, addictions, movements, believing salvation would come from somewhere out there. But the self was never out there. It was waiting, quietly, endlessly, not in the future, not in the heavens, but beneath your conditioning, inside your contradictions, within your deepest silence. And that silence, the one you feared all your life, is not emptiness. It's a doorway. You are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that hears it. You are not the mask. You are the face that dares to remove it. You are not your trauma, your persona, your programming. You are the witness to it all. And when you finally see that, really see it, something irreversible happens. The illusion shatters. You stop chasing. You stop performing. You stop outsourcing your worth. And in that stillness, something deeper stirs. Not joy exactly, not peace exactly, but home. You return to yourself, not the self they taught you to be, the self that was there before the world taught you to forget. You realize that society never truly controlled you. It only convinced you to abandon your own authority. The programming didn't erase your power. It just distracted you from it long enough that you began to doubt it ever existed. But now you remember. And with that remembering comes the final paradox. The more you become yourself, the less you need to prove it. The more you trust your inner voice, the less you need the world's approval. The more you reclaim your wholeness, the less you fear your brokenness. Because now you understand, there was never anything wrong with you. There was only something wrong with the way you were taught to see yourself. Jung called this process individuation, the sacred journey of becoming whole. It is not a straight path. It is not clean or painless. It is a descent into the underworld of your own psyche. It is standing face to face with the very parts of you you were taught to hate. It is rewriting the story, not to be palatable, but to be true. And when you do that, the world doesn't necessarily change. But you do. You walk differently. You speak with less noise, but more meaning. You no longer need to be seen in every room, because you've finally seen yourself. You live in alignment, not with what the world expects, but with what your soul knows. So now, the question becomes, what would your life look like if you stopped trying to fit in and started trying to remember? What would happen if you dropped the script, mid-scene, mid-sentence, and let silence write a new one? Would the world punish you? Maybe. Would it misunderstand you? Almost certainly. But would you feel alive? Absolutely. And that is the whole point. Not to be understood by a programmed world, but to be unapologetically known by yourself. To break the spell. To reclaim your mind. To walk back to the mirror where the puppet once danced. And finally meet the one who's been watching all along. You, the original, the rebel, the witness, the soul. And in the end, that is the only real freedom there ever was.